Welcome to the Ignite Healthcare Marketing Podcast. We have a special episode for you today. My name is Ashley Petrochenko. I head up Cardinal's brand marketing team. I'm filling in for Alex today, and I'm joined by Cardinal's SVP of Media and Analytics, Rich Briddock. We're here to discuss the recent FTC BetterHelp and GoodRX complaints, what that actually means, and how it impacts digital advertising in the healthcare industry. And then Rich is going to share a few recommendations that will help you remain compliant. So Rich, welcome.
Hey Ashley, how's it going?
Hi Rich. It's going great. Yeah, so I think there's been a little bit of anxiety and concern in the healthcare marketing world right now. People aren't really sure what this means, and they're not sure if they're violating HIPAA and sharing protected information. So I kind of first wanted to set the stage and dig into like what happened with BetterHelp and GoodRX to kind of have a baseline here.
Yeah, I think it's important to start there because this has been part of a trend that has been brewing for a while now. And essentially what happened in the most recent case and the most high profile, the biggest settlement was BetterHelp recently, which was an $8 million settlement that was paid out because of an FTC ruling. And the FTC found that BetterHelp was not compliant because essentially they were utilizing patient data to build lookalike audiences to find similar patients on social media advertising profiles. And they were also remarketing to lapsed patients. So people who had been getting treatment with BetterHelp and then had ceased treatment, and they were using that patient data to then essentially try and re-engage them and reactivate those patients. And they were doing this across both social platforms, but also across some display platforms. And essentially, what the FTC, I think, really took umbrage with was the fact that BetterHelp had said explicitly on a number of occasions when you were signing up to become a BetterHelp patient that they would not leverage your data for anything outside of, the standard just communication between you and the doctor or you and the provider, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And that even the provider would not be given your real email address. So then to find out that they'd actually been uploading all of these email addresses up into Facebook and into display platforms like Criteo. Obviously, that was sort of huge. That was completely misleading in terms of the claims that they'd made when patients were signing up to become part of the BetterHelp network.
So it wasn't just what they were sharing; it was their privacy policies and the agreements that they were putting forth when people signed up with the apps.
Yeah, exactly right, and sort of misleading patients on how their data would be leveraged by BetterHelp, essentially. Right. So I think there's kind of two parts to the issue with BetterHelp. It was what they were doing, but then how they were representing what they would do with your data that was the issue. And BetterHelp has claimed that this is sort of standard advertising practice, that everybody utilizes their own customer list, their own patient data to create lookalikes and sends this data into Facebook and whichever other platforms they utilize, build custom audiences. And that remarketing is perfectly acceptable behavior in terms of, all advertisers do it. Everybody does it in the digital world. So that was their defense. But they did agree to, settle with the FTC and make the payment. But yeah, it's part of a larger trend. Obviously, GoodRX was also a pretty high profile case where they were doing the same thing using, patient data to target people more effectively via social media. And then, other clients or other companies like Cerebral just came out that they were also utilizing this practice as well. Unfortunately, I think what's happened is as Facebook, and certainly Facebook in light of the Cambridge Analytica piece, has restricted the amount of third-party audiences that are available for targeting, advertisers have relied more and more heavily on first-party audiences, which in this case is their existing patient base. And so you now have the situation where advertisers are spending millions off the back of this patient data that they're using primarily for the majority of their targeting.
So how can people still reach these audiences if they want to? If they're not allowed to use their first-party data and the demographic audiences are shrinking on these platforms, how can you still reach them on the platforms that they use most?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things to consider here is, firstly, what is a HIPAA violation, right? And obviously there's been recent updates to what is deemed a HIPAA violation by HHS. But in a nutshell, it's essentially where you're combining personal identifiable information. So that's going to be things like name, IP address, phone number, email, with health information on that user, right? And that can be explicit health information that they've given you, like I'm submitting a form and I'm interested in this service, or I have this condition, or it can be implied health information where a user goes and visits a specific condition page. So maybe they are on a page about, ADHD, and then it can be presumed that that user has ADHD, right? Because why else would they be on that page? And so it's the confluence of those two things, like knowing something about that could identify that user, what potentially their condition could be, but then also sending that data to a non-HIPAA compliant destination. And this is the big issue with Google Ads, Facebook ads, or any social platform for that matter, and even Google Analytics, is that there aren't BAAs that you can put in place with these platforms. So they are essentially deemed to be a non-HIPAA compliant destination. And what a lot of these platforms have done historically is they're essentially sucking up all this data about users as they come to your website and start browsing around. And in the case of something like Google Analytics, you're permitted, even if it's not actively going out and seeking out data that might be personally identifiable, you are permitted to send data to Google Analytics that would be personally identifiable. So there is nothing to stop you from sending an IP address, as an example, into Google Analytics. And so essentially then what you could have in Google Analytics is the combination of somebody's IP address, where potentially you could identify who that person is, or a device ID, which is even more specific to that person, and the pages of the website that they visited. So you can from that data, you can infer what their health condition might be. And so those two things together would be considered a HIPAA violation. So in order to get around that, essentially what you need to do to be completely safe is to use a third-party technology solution that sits in between your data and these platforms that you can have a BAA agreement with. And on our side, there's a company that we're looking into for our clients. It's a customer data platform, a CDP, called FreshPaint. And FreshPaint specializes in healthcare and specializes in this sort of data governance compliance layer, whereby our clients have a BAA agreement with FreshPaint. And then essentially how FreshPaint works is it will sort of house your patient data in a walled garden, and it will send only certain bits of information to the advertising platform or to the analytics platform to make sure that you're in compliance with HIPAA. So in the case of Google Analytics, it can ensure that you send data on the browsing behavior, which is what you really need Google Analytics for. So, that's the stuff like which pages did they go to, where you could infer potentially what their health condition is. But it will ensure that you never send anything that is personally identifiable about that user. On the flip side, with the advertising, you can send personally identifiable information back to Facebook or to these display platforms so they know who you are. But what this CDP can do is it can restrict which pages you went to and make sure that data is not sent back into the ad platforms. So by essentially bifurcating those two groups of data that need to be combined to lead to a HIPAA infringement or a HIPAA violation, you're protecting yourself, whereby you can still utilize the same advertising practices that you did before, but you're limiting the types of data that these platforms can see, so that they're not putting the whole picture together, which would, like I said, end up constituting a violation under HIPAA. So that's one route that you can go down is deploying a technology layer that will essentially protect you. Obviously, another route that you can go down is you can look at your advertising practices right now. You can review those, and you can say, which of these do we think might not be HIPAA compliant? So certainly things like utilizing patient lists for lookalike audiences or retargeting on a lapsed patient list, as is the case that BetterHelp did, those would definitely not be HIPAA compliant. If you were doing pixel-based retargeting against anonymized users, where you are doing sort of a general retargeting, where you're not doing like a condition-based messaging, like hey, we think you've got this condition, so this is why we're the solution, that may be deemed to be HIPAA compliant, right? Because you're not leveraging any healthcare data on that user, right, to target them specifically for advertising purposes. So again, I think there's going to be, you're going to have a good compliance team here who can help you navigate these waters, or an expert on HIPAA and advertising who can help you stay compliant. But I would say, the focus should be that if you are unsure, I would steer clear from it at the moment. And if you feel like this is going to create a material disadvantage in terms of your advertising effectiveness, then at that point you should be looking for a technology solution that can help you remain compliant and keep the avenues that you were previously using open for reaching the right consumer.
As a first step, if people are feeling concerned right now, kind of take a pause, audit their existing landscape, see what they currently have running, campaigns that may be questionable, pause, kind of take a look at everything to make sure that they're not using any customer list, old customer list. Take a look at what kind of pixel tracking they're doing on their website. Maybe is there any kind of tracking technologies that they are okay to keep in place, or things that they want to just immediately eliminate? Is that something maybe you can speak to a little bit there in terms of like auditing and looking for like things that might be a concern if they're trying to kind of just assess where they're at?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult question to answer, right? Because there's so many pixels out there, and trying to gain understanding of exactly what data points each pixel is collecting is very difficult to know, because it's not, unfortunately, we just don't have insight into all the data that Google or Facebook, as an example, are gathering in that session when that pixel fires. So it's hard to know exactly what data is being collected. I think that's the benefit of a CDP solution like FreshPaint, where you can actively opt into the data that you are sending to the pixel, which I think is the key piece of their solution, right? Is by default, you're not sending any data to that pixel, but then you can activate certain parameters that you are willing to send that will allow you to remain in compliance, but also get some effectiveness out of the data that's being sent to the ad platform, and so that you can leverage it as a channel. I would say the main thing, though, is the first place that I would start in terms of vetting everything is making sure that you are not uploading existing patient lists into any of these platforms, and that you are not doing anything with that, right? So you're not building lookalike audiences, and you are not remarketing based off that patient list. That would be the first place that I would go through everything and just ensure that that is not happening, because we know from the judgments that unless you have actively sought consent from your patient base to use their data in that way, we know that that's a violation. So that would be the first place that I would start. In terms of trying to understand, data being used by the pixels, I think that's going to be more difficult. From the judgments that I've looked at, it doesn't seem that the FTC is particularly taking umbrage with sort of standard pixel data collection. That's not to say that they won't start to look at companies with advertising practices that are based just around data that's gathered by the pixel. I'm not saying that that's not going to come along, but it seems more about the use of lists that really seems to be the issue right now. So, to be extra safe, you're going to want to look at that technology solution that helps you gate what data goes back to the pixels. But I think for now, it's more around what are you doing with your patient lists and that data, and how are you sharing them with ad platforms? Yeah,
that makes sense. That's the first thing that people are concerned about with right now. And then if they really want to continue marketing to existing patients or past patients, they need to look at some kind of solution, CDP solution, if they want to continue. And I think probably like you mentioned, involving their legal counsel and running things by with them and collaborating on what kind of policy disclaimers that they are having and how they collect information and how they use it would probably be another good step in terms of doing their due diligence here. What is your recommendations for healthcare groups who are trying to reach prospective patients? How do they go about building these audiences and targeting them on social display advertising? How can they reach them now without using customer lists, without using remarketing?
So if you want to engage effectively with prospective patients, and you can't use first-party patient lists anymore. One way that you can do that right is through what we call a full funnel strategy. And so essentially what that means is you would utilize sort of broad targeted video campaigns at the top of the funnel, right? Just to let them know about your business, drive some awareness. And you might use like a 15 to 30 second video clips to just explain the business to those consumers, build a little bit of brand rapport, convey your value props, your USPs. And then essentially what's going to happen is you can track what percentage of users view a certain percentage of more of that video. And then you can remarket to those video engagers based on who has consumed that video content. Now, you don't know anything about these people. They haven't even been to your website yet, chances are. But you know that they're interested in your solution, right? So that you don't have any personally identifiable information about these folks, right?
They just liked your video enough to watch it for 15 seconds.
They just liked your video enough to watch it. So that is a perfectly safe audience to retarget because you don't know anything about them other than that they were interested in your video, right? And then that way, once you retarget to them in the middle of the funnel, you can then drive them to the website, and then potentially, again, you have to think about this with your own compliance team, but you could then, once they've been to the website, you could then remarket to them to try and drive them back for a conversion, for a lead. Or if you feel like that step is now essentially going to put you in a place where maybe you're not being compliant, you can essentially use the video re-engager audience as your bottom of the funnel conversion audience and essentially just try and drive those guys to the website to drive a conversion. So essentially you've got an audience that is compliant because all you've done is serve a video to them and they've consumed some of that video, and then you're trying to drive them to the site to convert, which should have no issues in terms of remaining compliant. And you can deploy that tactic both on social and through display. We use certain DSPs where you can run video campaigns, and then again, the exposure of that video, and then you can remarket to people who have consumed a certain percentage. Yeah, I think that's a completely valid tactic that you can utilize potentially while your compliance team is figuring out whether or not you can do other things in terms of site-wide remarketing, and while you're looking at potential technology solutions that could help you circumnavigate some of these compliance issues.
And Rich, that initial audience that you're building, that's all based on demographic information that about your ideal patient that you're trying to reach. Location, age, gender, all of that is where your starting audience is. And then from there, you're just engaging the people who are most interested and pushing them down to a conversion on your site.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Great. That sounds like a great interim solution while trying to figure out how to go forward with different technologies to make sure that there's no violation of HIPAA. Do you think it's the people, non-healthcare marketers moving into the healthcare space that is leading to some of these issues? Because you were mentioned, we use email lists for all of our advertising targeting. I buy lists from ZoomInfo, so I'm just thinking these are common practices, like you mentioned, in the rest of the world, rest of the digital marketing world. People get customer lists and they market to them. That's best practice. Everyone knows to do that. That's what you're supposed to do. And then you move into the healthcare world, and there's growing scrutiny and concern of sharing protected information. Do you think that's kind of where some of these breaches and misunderstanding of how data is being used is happening?
I think a lot of it is stemming from the fact, especially in the behavioral health space, I think there's a lot of advertisers in the game, right? Mm-hmm. It's become a lot more compared to 5 years ago. You've got so many advertisers. The market has become so fragmented. You've got companies spending millions on paid social. And I just think it's become more and more of you can't ignore it anymore, right? The practice. And if you read the BetterHelp complaint, one of the major things that the FTC called out is that the person who was in charge of the social campaigns was an intern. They had an intern that's
scrutiny of knowing what's right or wrong. They're just doing.
Yeah, they had an intern who was running it, who had no compliance training, who was just doing whatever they wanted. And so this was the gripe, it's it's the Wild West out there. The people who are making the advertising decisions are not trained, are not HIPAA. To your point, they don't know that these things are not what they should be doing. They have no concept of how, and I don't think they are maliciously doing these things. They're just not trained to know you can't do that with patient data.
And they're following, like, if they're untrained, they don't know better, they're following recommended practices that they read on, other people's blogs. Like, sure, I'll do that. And they don't really understand that it's actually not okay in the healthcare world and that they're going to be putting their company at risk. So there needs to be a lot more training, both internally from a compliance standpoint, and it sounds like working with a partner that actually understands the nuances of healthcare and what you can and can't share, so to make sure that you're not at risk.
Yeah, I think if you're a major advertiser and you're spending, tens of thousands of dollars, especially if you're doing that on social media, you should look into a technology solution, right? Because the chances are that is a sort of vital part of your marketing mix. And if your options are lose that, or spend a bit of money to make it compliant, then I think the latter option is definitely the better option, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the way to go. Thank you for sharing these recommendations. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help you guide you through this process. Rich is always available to share a little bit of information here. So
I was just saying, this is a constantly evolving solution, or constantly evolving situation. So, as and when we know more, I'm sure we'll be doing follow-up podcasts where we discuss different solutions and different ways to stay compliant.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Looking forward to sharing more information on this.